And we're good. Over to you, colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Okay, can we go on the next slide, please, Zara? Okay, thank you very much. So I was asked to tell you a little bit about how this collaboration came about. It came about through a joint interest in home, community, and heritage languages. And the link is actually the LAGB, or even more precisely, the LAGB Education Committee, because I'd been arguing for a link in a language teaching between the L1 English in our case and modern foreign languages to link the curricula on these two subjects. And of course, the natural consequence would also be to link home, community, and heritage languages in. I'd been talking about this, and then I saw that Yuni is also interested in the topic because she put an LAGB survey call for evidence out in 2022. And last year, Zara gave a talk in the LAGB Education Committee session on her research. And then we had what is a really great team, and we started working and published the first joint paper, Diverse Tongues, Unheard Voices, in Bearer Special Issue in 2024. And very soon, another paper is coming out in the special issue of LSB. Thank you. Next slide. And I would like to start with just giving a bit of background to what we did together. So for talking about home, community, and heritage languages and modern foreign language A-levels, it's important to first know what is the idea, or what was the idea behind MFL A-levels. They were conceived as a second language qualification, so aimed at students learning the subject. That's the background, and that's really important to keep in mind. So it was aimed at students who are learning the subject as an additional or foreign language. And of course, the question is, does this include home, community, and heritage language speakers as well? And this is why Ofqual was tasked with looking into this in 2017. They published their reports, and the report was motivated by stakeholder concerns that pupils are disadvantaged, that native speaker students are disadvantaged because they are not appropriately rewarded for their performance, and non-native speaker students are disadvantaged due to the presence of native speakers. And Ofqual then conducted some research, and they first tried to address the question of who is a native speaker with the National Pupil Database, which is, of course, available to them. And in the National Pupil Database, L1's first languages are recorded, but you can only record one L1. So multilingualism is basically ruled out. They then tried the Language Experience and Proficiency Questionnaire, better known as LIQ, which is a quantitative tool for establishing native speaker status. Ofqual found this didn't work at all because they didn't get enough responses. And in the end, they rely on teacher perceptions, who is a native speaker or not. And of course, there are issues because teachers may not have enough information on the pupils. So basically, the Ofqual report came to the conclusion that native speakers, and that's the only difference they found between what they classified as native speakers and non-native speakers, that native speakers have more potential to improve between GCSE and A-level than non-native speakers. They also concluded that the stakeholder concerns that motivated their research are largely unwarranted, and that for the national government or Ofqual to monitor native speaker status is not practical because they want to do it quantitatively. So this is the background of the Ofqual report. And the main question is, do A-levels in home heritage and community languages require the same academic achievement as other A-levels? And what we found is that there's a complete lack of policies. And what Zara and Yuni will be doing, they will be showing the impact of this lack of policies. And we will conclude with policy recommendations. And next slide, please. Just a few more words on the challenge of identifying native speakers, or addressing the question whether there is a scientifically coherent dichotomy between native and non-native speakers, particularly in the competences that are being assessed in A-level examinations. And I presume that all the people here will probably know that the answer to this question is no. And the main reasons for why the answer is no, and that we have to talk about various groups of native speakers or continua of native speakers, is the well-known individual variation in language competence, especially again in home heritage and community language. A very important point is language attrition, not just in the first generation, but the attrited L1 from the first generation then gets passed on to further generations and leads to qualitatively different input. And also considerations of internal factors like cognitive ability, and external factors, for example, which are the pupils the oldest in the family? Are they the youngest? Are they in the middle? And a lot of socioeconomic factors, gender factors that influence acquisition. These factors are beautifully summarized in a volume by Vulkanova et al. And one other piece of evidence we would briefly like to mention is the systematic or qualitative differences between home heritage community language speakers and children raised and educated in the country of origin. There are well-known differences, and the last point we would like to make on this is that the home community and heritage language speakers frequently know a variety that is different to the standard that is being taught, or varieties that are different to the standard being taught at A-level. And they also have different registers. They're, of course, familiar with the register used in the home domain, but less familiar with the registers required for A-level. Okay, and what we would like to do is, if somebody in the audience knows of specific UK-specific studies on the topic, we would be keen to hear from you, and feel free to put references in the chat. And with that, I hand over to Zara, who is going to do the main part of our talk.
Thank you, Ava. So yeah, as Ava said earlier, myself and Yuni were particularly interested in looking at the impact on these policies or on heritage language provision, and the kind of qualitative data to back up some of the quantitative data that Ava's just outlined by Ofqual and that volume. So I looked at, in my undergraduate degree, as for my dissertation, I looked at kind of motivational factors for languages uptake between the global majority and those who identify as BAME, particularly, so the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. Obviously, I recognise that's quite a problematic term, and I try not to generalise communities, and within the paper I do disaggregate communities where possible. But regardless, I found that these policies in particular have an impact on young people from ethnic minorities, who I argue are a demographic already absent in the post-16 MFL classroom. So I don't have time to really outline all of the data I found, But yeah, you can kind of see from our previous issues that Ava mentioned before for some further discussion. But for the purposes of this talk, we looked at home heritage and community language uptake amongst minority groups. And the main takeaway was that I found there was a massive disconnect between community language use and uptake at post-compulsory level for students who were underrepresented. So in my study, I found that 76% of underrepresented participants knew at least one community language, but only 12% knew two or more. And these ranged from a wide range of languages, from Urdu, Tamil, Arabic, Spanish, Patois, Russian, Zulu, etc. However, of this 76%, a staggering 82% chose not to pursue a qualification in their community language. And so we were interested in why this was, and the kind of qualitative reasons for their decisions. So I picked out basically 4 key factors for the motivational decline. So we found that there was a general stigma and negative perceptions towards heritage languages in particular amongst the BAME community and families within the BAME community, which in turn pushes students towards STEM subjects over languages. We found that schools reinforce a kind of subject hierarchy or the big 3 of languages, so French, German or Spanish, leaving kind of little room to provide education in heritage languages. And schools argue this is compounded by funding constraints and retention of teachers, especially those who are qualified to teach these languages. And also, as Yuni will explain later in our presentation, there exist exclusionary higher education admission policies which only accept certain languages by certain speakers, which of course create anxiety and confusion. So if we look at some of these factors in detail, so regarding the stigma surrounding heritage languages, one student commented in my study that sometimes attitudes towards languages from family members growing up gave me the idea that it's a soft subject, which made me worried about job prospects. So I chose not to study it because of this stigma. So I decided to look into this a bit more in my study. And yeah, like I just said, we found that there was greater stigma and dismissal towards language qualifications. And generally in the BAME community, again, a massive generalization, but there typically tends to be a lack of awareness of job prospects attached to languages qualifications, which in turn leads them to mislabeling it as a soft subject. I found that this then promotes a risk aversion in career choices among immigrant families, which leads to a bigger science capital, which means that if parents had a STEM career, for example, they were doctors, there would be a science capital within the family, which can influence children to pursue paths that were already familiar to family members or who elder generations had deemed a success, such as science, medicine, law, etc. I also found that exclusionary school practices, or like I said, the subject hierarchy can influence decision-making, particularly with heritage languages. So students commented how my school wouldn't allow me to take a non-European language for GCSE. Another student said my school didn't offer Punjabi GCSE as I went to a white majority school. I didn't even know that I could. Another person said they would have actually studied languages at A-level, but they were interested in other languages not offered at their 6th form. Another said I wanted to gain a qualification in my heritage language, but they couldn't read or write it, and they had no formal education like they did with French or Spanish. And lastly, someone said the languages on offer at my 6th form, so French and Spanish, would not help me, they felt, in their medical job, whereas knowledge of Romanian or Polish, for example, would really help. So we've seen that students generally are interested in learning languages, but it just wasn't viable in their schools. Schools, this is seen as, this community language is then seen as inferior to the big 3, as we've seen, which leads to students feeling uneducated or underprepared because they feel they have no formal education or not as strong education as maybe French, German or Spanish. So again, when looking into this a bit more deeply, schools claim this is because of the lack of teachers or specialist teachers, financial constraints, as we know, often because there's competition between languages themselves. So some schools or most schools won't even offer all 3, French, German or Spanish. They'll only offer French and German or French and Spanish these days. Or they have a greater focus on STEM subjects, which then impact language provision. What was quite worrying as well from my study was that students were often unaware altogether or actively discouraged from studying their community language. So we question whether schools are doing enough to facilitate provision of language qualifications. And so since this was a race and social justice talk, we looked at, again, looking deeper into factors behind motivational decline, particularly from a practical point of view and in schools. And we found that 46% of schools don't even have teachers of colour or from the BAME community in England. Arguably what's worse, in 2018, only 14% of trainee teachers were from BAME backgrounds. And again, this is also compounded by the fact that 1 in 3 teachers typically leave after 5 years. And we can imagine this is more generally. So in languages, particularly heritage languages, the picture's probably worse. And it means that the teachers that we do have, while they're amazing, probably don't have the sufficient cultural or advanced linguistic knowledge to teach these students. And yeah, in general, are they doing enough to promote language study amongst minority students, particularly those with community languages? So Yuni will explain this a bit more in a minute, but we also then looked at higher educational policies and whether these contribute to the decline in studying languages, particularly heritage languages. And we found that typically because of the idiosyncrasies of universities choosing their own policies, it just creates further anxiety and confusion amongst heritage speakers, because ultimately who decides who is a native speaker? And Yuni will share some shocking examples of how they do this. But students fear both that their heritage language may not be accepted, but also because if they have an ethnically identifiable name, it might give the wrong impression about their achievement or whether they know the language altogether or whether they don't know the language. So if there is like the slightest room for doubt that another subject will be better for them, students typically won't study or won't pursue a languages qualification, which in turn then leads to a decline in students progressing to a languages degree. And as we know, the close restructuring, of languages departments nationally. We argue that universities can play a key role in boosting both the participation and prestige, especially of lesser studied languages, for a more equitable educational system that represents the diversity of the UK. So now I hand over to Yuni to talk about existing practices in the UK.
Thank you, Zara. So my job here was to visit the websites of all universities in the UK to figure out what they say, what they're doing, and what messages they're sending around acceptance of A-levels from heritage speakers. I'd also like to refer to the recent paper by Emma Humphreys, Janice Carruthers, and Leanne Henderson, which is very complementary to ours. So for example, they have a smaller sample of universities, but do a little bit more of a multifaceted dive. So I'd really recommend that if you're interested in the topic. So what I found out is that only a handful actually really bring it up on their central university admissions website. This is already, not insignificant. A lot of these are actually quite, selective universities. 8 of them bring up the topic in order to say we accept all languages A-levels on an equal basis, to allay that doubt, really, because it is something that's floating out there. 6 bring it up, but actively cast it into a little bit of doubt. I'll show some examples. But then equally interesting, I thought, was even where an explicit central statement is not made, there are subtler ways in which the messages universities send about admissions might encourage heritage speakers or discourage them based on other little messages that are being sent. We also found examples of universities that have no stated central policy, at least not publicly stated, but individual courses going their own way. And we'll see some examples of that too. Next slide, please. All right, so here's an example of a positive, supportive statement. So let's see. This is an FAQ on the undergraduate admissions site of this university. And notice the first question on entry requirements is, can you accept native language A-level? So this is clearly something they've been getting a lot. And they say we can consider native language A-level subjects, including Chinese, modern Greek, Urdu, and many others. So they clarify this, and we think that's great. Next slide, please. All right, so, oh, sorry for this. Yeah, I tried to highlight and it got a little bit off. But anyway, so what I call the room for doubt ones is the ones that say, yeah, sometimes, but maybe not, which is possibly not encouraging if you have a student who is choosing their A-level subjects and doesn't know which university or which course they're going to apply for. They may decide to play it safe. Some phrases I've highlighted, for example, there were several examples of things like we may not be able to accept a language qualification designed for non-native speakers when presented by a native speaker. Now, this raises the issue of whether the language's A-levels are really designed for a specific audience, which, with the possible exception of some different pathways for Welsh, I think is not actually true. Yes, and then this below this slightly different statement, we differentiate between language learning qualifications and those designed for competent language users. That's a bit strange if the people who set those qualifications are not making such a distinction. Next slide, please. All right, so one highly selective university's advice for students who want to go on to study arts and humanities at university, we recommend that you choose 2 of these A-levels: English literature, a language, such as French, German, Spanish. Beyond the big 3, why not throw in Latin just to be more inclusive? So yeah, again, against the backdrop of Zara's findings, where home heritage and community languages are maybe not being valued or their academic value is cast into doubt, this is not going to be terribly encouraging. Next, please. All right, so and then here's an example of a university that has no central policy. So actually, I don't have a number, but I think the majority either don't say anything or they say, please check individual course pages for the entry requirements for each course. So the top one, if the candidate's 3rd A-level is a language subject other than English of which they are a home or native speaker, an adjusted offer will be made. So yes, there is this active downgrading. And then we will ask candidates to sign a declaration as to whether they are a native or home speaker of that language. We've already problematized this assumed dichotomy between native and non-native speakers. We've problematized, well, I think most of us on this call are aware that research does not really, as Ava said, that research does not really support a strong correlation between the kinds of competencies that are acquired in a home or community setting and those assessed on the A-levels, but never mind. Meanwhile, elsewhere at the same university, there's a specification: own language may be considered. It may not be totally transparent what this means. The CLI, so the Committee for Languages and Linguistics in Education, and others have been reaching out to individual courses with restrictions, with language-based restrictions, and sharing evidence and arguments. And most departments who are reached out to are very open to this information, and many have changed their policies as a result. So we have examples of courses where a few years ago, their FAQ, again, this is just an individual degree in an individual subject, their FAQ might have said, we do not accept A-levels from heritage speakers, and that FAQ now says, we accept A-levels from native speakers. For example, if you speak Chinese at home, we would accept the Chinese A-level. Although that particular course had a website revamp and now it's not addressed at all, but you get the idea. Next slide, please. All right, so another way in which university web pages or messaging can implicitly encourage or discourage uptake of these heritage language qualifications is that some universities say things like, we accept all A-levels, maybe accept general studies or critical thinking. These include, and then they go on to list every A-level subject that's offered. So for someone who sees their heritage language listed there, this is quite encouraging. Other universities say things like, we accept A-level qualifications. You need 3 of them. In light of the doubt and anxiety that we now know is out there, this may still leave some uncertainty in the minds of school students and their families. So just to conclude this little survey of basically Googling different universities' websites, one thing I noticed was that heritage languages are really the only individual subject that are problematized on the basis of personal experience. So we had some fun with this, actually, thinking of analogies to if one of your parents or carers is a professional chef, are you then not allowed to take the qualification relating to, is it called food technology, or there is one? But then more concretely, if you think about other subjects, if a child has been privileged to have music lessons since they were very young, this tends to be encouraged. If a child has been taken to art museums since they were very young, rather than discouraging them from taking the art history qualification, you can imagine universities would value this and really be encouraging the person to develop. Similarly, it's already the case that some children are read to from birth and surrounded by books in their home, and others don't have that opportunity. But the movement is all towards trying to encourage this and trying to value and build on the skills that are acquired at home. So this leads one to wonder, where is this focus on languages coming from? Next slide, please. So from a layperson's perspective, you can kind of understand where it's coming from, actually, that especially at a very basic level where some pupils are struggling to communicate sentences in a language that they're learning, whereas other students are maybe conversant. Yeah, you can see why the initial concern arose, but this is really not supported by research. Another observation I've had is that anecdotally, when we tell people that we are working on this, people with lived experience of home, heritage, and community languages kind of instantly think it makes a lot of sense, and they say things like, well, of course I could never pass an A-level because I haven't studied it. And yes, this is the same thing as all the research that shows that it's virtually unattested that that heritage speakers would have the same skills as someone educated in the home country without support from formal instruction. But yeah, you think that you think that maybe if there was more lived experience present among the people who are making decisions at universities about admissions policies, that there might be more of a voice coming from that side. I think I've covered the second point. So next, thank you. So to conclude, our recommendations are that all language A-levels should be accepted on an equal basis, and also that the best practice for university admissions websites is to be aware that there is doubt about these language qualifications out there, and to dispel that doubt by being very clear that that these are accepted. It's been pointed out to us that UK higher education institutions have legal autonomy to establish their own policies, so this can't be done from the top down, but we hope that by disseminating information and by continuing to open the discussion, we can promote uptake of language qualifications through changing the messaging that's coming from universities, and hopefully this would reduce student anxiety and promote inclusivity and diversity in higher education. I think that's all. Yes, so thank you very much from all 3 of us. And we have left time because we would really like to hear your input and your questions. Thank you.